Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Little Rock, where love is our teaching and service is our prayer. I'm Cass Rifkin. I lead a covenant group, and I'm glad to be here today. If you are a newcomer, we're glad you've chosen to join us for worship. While you're here, we ask that you stop by our guest table to fill out a guest card, pick up some information about our church. I now invite our illuminator, Brett Ferris, to come forward to light the chalice and lead us in our affirmation of covenant, which is printed in your order of services.
I light the chalice with these words. Open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Open our minds to learn what is true. Open our hearts to love one another. Please join me in the affirmation of covenant, saying, love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus we do covenant with each other.
My first acquaintance with Margaret Wheatley's work came through her third book, published in 2002, called Turning to One Another. It was about how simple, meaningful conversation can make our lives and our world better. She wrote about conversation and dialogue as vehicles for building and strengthening relationships, for identifying shared values and goals, and finding a common ground where leadership and creativity and kindness and generosity can grow and bloom organically in a community. She wrote, there is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. Not long before, in 4 consecutive General Assemblies between 1998 and 2001, dedicated to the theme Fulfilling the Promise, we Unitarian Universalists had explored in depth our heritage of covenant making. For many of us, her words, there is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. Her words resonated strongly with what we had learned. And at that time, I was also newly acquainted with a then trendy topic in the business and leadership literature called policy governance. And I saw a kinship between her emphasis on how shared values empower leaders and that of policy governance on how thoughtfully designed policies empower leaders. What they had in common was the idea that through thoughtful conversation and listening, we can arrive at a shared clarity around values and goals that empowers leadership and creativity, and the process of achieving that clarity also strengthens relationships and inspires kindness and generosity, and therefore better teamwork. So something was in the air back then, but it was not something new. Indeed, it was ancient. More than 2,000 years ago, writing about rhetoric, Cicero treated conversation as distinct from oratory because it is not one speaker addressing a passive audience, but rather a group of equals all contributing. So it is possible for its mode of persuasion to be reason alone. While oratory relies heavily on a passive audience's perception of the speaker, is this someone of good character whom we can trust? And on the impression left by their passion in expressing themselves. In conversation, since all participate, those qualities are less important. There is room to judge less and listen more. But oratory and conversation are alike in being action-oriented. Neither is abstract. The contentious dialectic of philosophers is something else altogether. Above all, said Cicero, conversation is relationship-oriented, governed by constructive emotions like devotion, desire for truth, and the impulse toward friendship. I later learned more about Margaret Wheatley's intellectual journey. She got her start as a consultant, reflecting on what the latest ideas in science might suggest about leadership. Her first book, back in 1992, Leadership and the New Science, in that book she explored complexity theory, or chaos theory, as it used to be called. 4 years later, in her second book, A Simpler Way, she investigated self-organizing living systems, or as she put it, how to organize the way life organizes. So she started by pondering science. After turning to one another came her fourth book, Finding Our Way, about how to foster creativity and kindness and resilience. Both of those books were published after 9/11. Her next book, Perseverance, about navigating difficult times, came out in 2010, around the time of the Tea Party movement. There, she wrote about how fear, guilt, joy, and wisdom in different ways affect our capacity to stay with practices that foster creativity and kindness. In 2012, she published So Far From Home, on how polarization, bureaucracy, and a felt loss of meaning affect those same capacities. She encouraged her readers to become warriors for the human spirit. Her next book, Who Do We Choose to Be?, appeared as the current president began his first term. She wrote then about facing reality, claiming our power to make positive change and build conscious community, or as she likes to say, islands of sanity. In her latest book, Restoring Sanity, written or published 2 years ago before the election, she explored how fear and aggression suppress and how islands of sanity help sustain our capacities to foster creativity, kindness, and generosity. So one can see in her publishing history both her steady engagement with changing times and her consistent message about fostering leadership and creativity and kindness and generosity. I have found her message inspiring. Reflecting on her own journey recently, she wrote, approaching 80, I look back and see what a rich and blessed life I've had. I've been able to give my curiosity free rein and to be with extraordinary teachers and companions. I've been able to explore a wide range of disciplines, lived in several different cultures, and raised a large family. She married a widower with 5 children, and they had 2 more. I've learned from an incredible diversity of people, she said, from indigenous peoples to the Dalai Lama, from leading scientists to national park rangers, engaged activists to solitary monastics. This access to so many sources of experience and wisdom, held in the container of friendship, continues to deepen my resolve. Of late, though, I perceive that she has been showing signs of fatigue. Can anyone relate? She is among those who believe there are certain patterns in history that allow us to discern where we are today and to predict what will happen next. She's written and talked a lot about that, and there is a certain truth to it. The saying I like best about that is history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Wheatley often talks about a historical pattern of empires, that they have a life cycle, a birth, a growth, a degeneration, and a death, just like we do individually. One reason I think she's showing fatigue is that she recently has been saying that the United States is an empire in decline, and adding, that's not just my opinion, that's history. Well, that's not history. History is not a prediction. It's a story we tell ourselves after the fact. And one of the big lessons about history in our time has been we have to be careful what stories we tell ourselves, that we're not telling ourselves lies that do harm to our neighbors and ourselves. Another reason I suspect some fatigue is setting in for her is how she talks about joy. She likes to tell a story about the Dalai Lama, that he was meeting with some group of experts to talk about the causes of suffering. And they brainstormed a list: poverty, hunger, war, and so on. And he said, no, the cause of suffering is that well-intentioned people fail to notice what is arising among them. Now, that story is apocryphal and told by a lot of folks, but it's not so far out. About 40 years ago, the Dalai Lama founded an institute, the Mind and Life Institute, where he does talk with leading scientists and psychologists and philosophers about the causes of suffering and about developing compassion. And there is a Buddhist teaching called dependent arising that roughly corresponds to the value we call interdependence. And he usually talks about ignorance as the cause of suffering and recommends, guess what, conversation and learning. But where I heard Wheatley go next in a recent talk was to say in so many words that it is wrong to focus on joy. And I know she said that because she believes that joy is ephemeral when we pursue it just for itself, and that joy emerges from shared, meaningful service or work for a larger cause. She feels very strongly about that. She says joy is a consequence, that you start out to be of service. He emphasizes that a lot lately. And there's truth in that, and also it is true that one can't sustain shared, meaningful work or service without joy. And sometimes that means, as Blake wrote, kissing the joy as it flies, noticing simple joys and savoring them. In the latest newsletter email from the Church of the Larger Fellowship, aka the CLF, the UUA's ministry to folks who don't live near a UU congregation. That's what the CLF is. One of the co-leaders of that ministry, Aisha Hauser, wrote about this. She said, I live in Seattle, one of the host cities of the FIFA World Cup, and is it FIFA or FIFA? I don't know. FIFA? Sports is not my main gig. Anyway, she lives in Seattle hosting some of the World Cup games and the largest global sports event on the planet, that World Cup. She says some here have been grumbling for the last few months about increased traffic, increased and already high prices of everything, and general unease about how visitors would be treated by a hostile government. Some of the challenges have certainly come to pass. So many high-profile football team staff have been denied entry into the U.S., and the first Somali referee selected for the FIFA World Cup was denied entry to the United States. These grim tactics, she says, of a cruel regime have not diminished the joy of the global gathering. It is in times like these, she says, that I feel world peace in my bones. Humans are not meant to be at war and attacking each other. Humans have it in us to lean into joy, love, celebration, and community care. I believe that is more our nature than anything else. So she says, I may not be attending any World Cup games in person, but I will be celebrating the world coming together for a few weeks to prove that ordinary people can and will transform our hurting world. And for me, that was the takeaway of experiencing life with Mardi Gras every year. The community comes together. Strangers share joy. Friends meet up to share that experience. And when it comes time to get back to service and work toward a higher cause, we all have a lot more energy for it. That's what comes to mind when I think of flourishing together. Joy isn't just a consequence. It is also a thing to be pursued for its own sake, especially when it comes in the form of a whole community pursuing it together. So I wish for Margaret Weekly, and I wish for each of you that you notice and savor the joy that arises among us, and pursue and practice what brings you joy. Because as consequence or goal, joy makes us feel more alive and able to sustain our efforts in work that we are called to do and that we care about, service that we can give, and meeting life's challenges. Rejoice always, wrote Paul the Apostle, to which Paul the minister says, Amen.
I invite you to stay standing as I invite Brett Ferris back up to extinguish our chalice as we join together in saying our closing words. Go out in the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings.
And may you flourish with joy.